Good morning. My name is Kristen McIntyre, and I'll be serving as today's service coordinator. I've only done this a couple times before, and Leon was always here, kind of nudging me in the right direction. So please be kind if I ring the wrong singing bell. Singing bowl. Before we start, we have a few brief announcements. If you're new to North Chapel, welcome, and if you're a visitor, please consider signing the guest book. And after today's service, we will have a pizza party to thank Monica for all of her work with our kids in the Youth SE program and to welcome Tatum. Are there any other announcements? This morning, Sarah Reiter will be talking with us about her work protecting oceans while we face climate change. I first met Sarah about 5 years ago at Feast and Field. Our blankets were next to each other, and we had small babies crawling around of us. Much of our early friendship was spent that way, sitting on the floor with our small children. But eventually, we started to spend more time off of the floor, and our conversations expanded to discussions of what bulbs to plant in the fall, the pros and cons of snowboarding versus skiing, Inferno Pilates versus yoga, and deeper subjects too. We consulted each other on adult relationships and career moves, and slowly I started to learn about the incredible and difficult work she and her colleagues were doing to protect our oceans. This spring, she mentioned that she was heading to Cambridge for the day to speak with a group of fellows at Harvard. I'm grateful that she's here to share also with us today. I'd like to start with a poem, Ode to Our Ocean, by Amanda Gorman. The sea sings out to its many saviors, teenagers with fists thrust into the air at climate strikes, scientists converging around their data, a child who stoops to scoop up a piece of trash. The sea sings out for its singular subjects, arching whales that wave from their waves, turtles that teeter down their shining shores, coral reefs shining brightly as cities. The sea sings out its suffering, knowing too much of waste, screeching sounds, and pernicious poison, its depths bruised by atrocities in the Atlantic. Misery in the Mediterranean, its tides the preservers of time past. The story of the ocean and the story of humanity are one and the same. A great river that knows no borders and notes no lines, only ripples. While we might call it the seven seas, today we sing out your true name, the one ocean. For no matter how we try to separate your waters, you are the colossus that connects us. Water makes up 70% of Earth, 70% of the human heart, and 70% of the human being, all of us, bodies of water, for we too are oceans, or at least beings bobbing in the same boat. To stand up for our ocean is to stand up for our own ship. The sea is a restless, strong collective of many pieces, so are we. The ocean can recover, and so will we. Let us not divide the tides, but discover all they have to teach us. Green meadows of seagrass that survives pathogens, blue-blooded marine snails that can fight off viruses. There are more lessons to learn, still more work to be done. So we lift our faces to the sun. May the seas help us see healing and hope. May we sing out the ocean's survival and revival. Being the people of this blue planet is our most profound privilege and power. For if we be the ocean's saviors, then it is surely ours.
Thank you. I'm so honored and humbled to have been asked to speak with you today. A portion of what I'm going to be saying is actually testimony that we submitted to Congress as written testimony, but did not speak orally. And I have found in practicing that speaking it has been difficult. So bear with me if I end up crying. So for as long as I can remember, I've been awed by nature. This wonder and curiosity for the interconnectedness between all living things has driven what I do in my profession. When I was 18, I took an oath to protect the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, in pursuit of my degree in oceanography at the U.S. Naval Academy. I was inspired by the opportunity to train dolphins, the potential to travel to Antarctica on a research cruise, and to learn the physics governing how waves crash and storms build up, only to rain down. I did train dolphins, and I did learn fluid physics, but I never made it to Antarctica. Instead, I was the last class to enter a military academy during a time of peace. My freshman year, the September 11th attacks occurred, and my trajectory shifted drastically towards learning how to combat terror abroad. But it was actually my lived experience as an officer in charge of a team of 45 meteorologists that really changed how I thought about service. Our work was less focused on combating terror and increasingly more focused on combating climate change. We supported rescue operations in the aftermath of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. We saw snowstorms in Arizona and experienced an increase in the frequency and intensity of storms along Tornado Alley. Climate migration within the United States began, and the concept of national security was expanding to include energy security, food security, and water security. I completed my military service and set about to serve as a change maker for the Earth system and its communities, knowing that where physics governs the Earth system, the law governs our everyday lives. So I got my law degree and started working with marine scientists at Stanford University and the University of Oxford, mapping out how we can harness the power of the ocean as a solution. Most recently, I began working to tackle the climate and biodiversity crisis by figuring out how to bring offshore renewable energy online while also protecting endangered species like the North Atlantic right whale and leatherback sea turtles. This work is indicative of a generational transformation we are seeing in what we call the sustainable blue economy, which consists of existing and emerging uses of the ocean, like fishing and shipping, aquaculture, and renewable energy. Some that harness the ocean as a solution, and others that have to date been extractive in nature. Today, I want to spend some time talking to you about my work at New England Aquarium, and I want to tell you about Wart, one of the 350 remaining right whales we are working to protect. But first, let me explain the climate and biodiversity crisis and what we need to do about them. Woodstock is familiar with the climate crisis. Flood events are occurring more frequently and more intensely than ever before. Wildfire smoke keeps us indoors. Several iconic Vermont crops, from the sugar bush to the apple orchard, have been impacted by exceptional weather events. Climate migrants have already begun moving to the Upper Valley because it is one of the nation's most climate-resilient places to live, with clean air, water, and abundant resources. Planning workshops are already underway to prepare for this increased migration. I am still coming to terms with the fact that it will be impossible to protect the next generation from being touched by climate change. My children have yet to reach middle school, and they've been impacted by a global plague, wildfires, and catastrophic flooding. The science indicates that certain places will never recover, no matter how much we do to stabilize the climate. Negotiations are occurring between sovereign nations as vulnerable, low-level islands seek new lands to move their nations. Those who had the least to do with contributing to the emissions have the greatest burden to bear. We have caused irreparable harm to the environment. The ocean absorbs carbon and produces half of every breath we take, but the ocean is unable to heal because it's becoming increasingly acidic and warmer, while its overall oxygen composition is in decline. Still, we must and we can work to mitigate our impact as we also prepare to adapt. We've been handed targets that will help us stabilize the atmosphere and achieve net zero emissions. And this new era also presents the very stark reckoning with how we treat animals and plants. The climate crisis is linked with the biodiversity crisis. We need to protect 30% of land and water in the next 7 years, or we will see a dangerous decline in nature. Which brings me to wort, a North Atlantic right whale. I've shared a printout of wort's family tree, which you can find in your pew. The right whale is one of the most endangered large whale species in the world, eating between 2,000 to 5,000 pounds of tiny crustaceans a day through baleen plates much taller than us that filter mass quantities of ocean water. They can grow anywhere in the range of 45 to 55 feet and weigh up to 70 tons, and they are among the slowest swimming of all whales, averaging 6 miles an hour. We have wort's family tree in part because of callocytes, which are the raised white patches of skin on the whale's heads that act like fingerprints, the patterns unique to each individual whale. Nearly half their body weight is composed of blubber, which helps them regulate their temperature and travel to cold waters. Like us, they have lungs, and so they come to the surface to breathe, but they can stay under the water for 40 minutes at a time. In the span of my career, we have learned so much more about these magnificent creatures. Right whale mothers have strong attachments to their calves, staying together in close contact for up to a year. Mothers have been observed rolling over and holding their calves with their flippers. They were nearly hunted to extinction and have never quite recovered to pre-whaling numbers. The threats have changed, but the enemy has not. Unfortunately, humans are still the greatest danger to right whales, despite our good intentions. For more than 40 years, the New England aquarium scientists have been observing this whale, both by boat and by air, and documenting its life history and interactions with humans. The scientific community has painted a picture that demands we hold in our hearts both deep sorrow and great hope for the future. There are less than 350 right whales and less than 75 reproductive female right whales. Warming waters have altered their feeding grounds, which has led them into areas with more human activity, resulting in increased death from collisions with ships, entanglements in fishing gear, and lower reproductive rates. At the same time, many of the fishing communities impacted by this migration, whose gear is now entangling these whales, have depended on the fishing economy for generations. It has been their way of life. Further complicating the issue, with the ocean warming, right whale abundance has increased in waters that are designated for wind energy development off of Massachusetts. Our aerial surveys have documented that right whales are spending more time in this area. We now find ourselves asking how the development of offshore wind, which is a necessary and essential part of tackling the climate crisis, will impact this species. Our scientific community tells us now that even one human-caused death of a whale puts the entire species at risk of extinction. Take wort. She has given birth to 7 calves since 1982 and is responsible for at least 29 whales being added to the population so far. Wort's contributions to the population emphasize the effect that a single reproductive female can have on this small population. Humans, my colleagues, are working to reduce our impact on wort, her progeny, and the rest of the remaining population by focusing on measures that reduce the likelihood of a whale being entangled in fishing gear or struck by a vessel. There are no straightforward measures, as there is a cost to the humans who rely on fishing and shipping. When we testify before Congress with the best available science, we recommend slow zones in certain areas at certain times of year and for certain types of vessels. But the arguments soon turn to the importance of the economy, safety, and a seafaring way of life. When we seek innovative gear solutions so that whales are not entangled in vertical rope in the water from lobster traps, we face opposition so strong that few are brave enough to partner with us, and we have to have briefings with our scientists to ensure they can do their work safely amidst the threats. But the story of wort and the endangered North Atlantic right whale calls into question what we value and hold dear. As a result of the climate and biodiversity crisis, we must evolve our thinking and behaviors around our human traditions and culture in relation to fellow living creatures. For the reality is devastating. Though unintentional, the human-caused impacts can cause great suffering to these animals. One whale suffered deep propeller wounds from a vessel strike when she was less than a year old. She survived the boat strike, but when she became pregnant with her first calf, the growth of the fetus caused her wounds to reopen, and she and her unborn calf died from the resulting infection. The suffering is not limited to wounds from vessels. Our aerial survey team was flying 15 miles south of Nantucket last year on September 21st when they saw Snow Cone, another well-known right whale, actively entangled. Our research assistant who observed the whale was shocked by the decline in the whale's health since she had been previously seen. She was moving so slowly, she couldn't dive. She just sunk. She's suffering. There is no longer hope for her survival. When we talk about the population, we use numbers, scientific models, statistics, and facts. This is easier for me to do. I connect this with the law to make persuasive arguments to protect the species. Still, it is hard to rebut our collective need for safety, the economy, and livelihoods rooted in culture, all recognized as worthy of weight in our decision-making under the law. It is frustrating to see scientific credibility called into question. It is insulting to observe the theatrical antics of politicians in Congress. When we talk about the population, I have the toolkit, the science, the law, the political strategy, but I am so frustrated. But when we talk about these animals on an individual level, and we save space to comprehend the suffering and the stress we are causing, those arguments all fade away. I connect this with my heart and seek solace in knowing that others care. When we talk about the individual suffering and their families, I am grasping for tools. My frustration turns to sorrow. And still, each year, during calving season, this sorrow is forced to make way for joy when new life joins the population. Like the joys and concerns of this service, we learn to hold space for both. This December, we will celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act here in the United States. This law was drafted well before we were experiencing the climate crisis, and several marine mammal species have either been removed from the endangered species list or on their way to recovery due to the law and the work of scientists, lawyers, advocates, and bipartisan policymaking. This is a moment to recognize the successes we have had and acknowledge the work we have ahead of us in a changing climate. We have proven we can bridge between our relationship with the ocean and our fellow creatures. We used to hunt this whale intentionally. We have come so far in understanding our interconnectedness, and if we leaned in a bit more, we'd see reflected something about ourselves, our relationship to our environment, and communities in a changing climate. With compassion for the traditions of old and the courage needed for the vision of the future, I still believe we have the chance to tell our children about the death and the life of this whale and many other species against seemingly insurmountable odds. And in that story will be the lesson that it matters to care, to move from frustration to sorrow, and to build space for the spark of joy so that we can work in service of something bigger than oneself. Thank you for your time.
May we see all as it is, and may it all be as we see it. May we be the ones to make it as it should be. For if not us, who? If not now, when? Blessed be.